ultimately ended up reaching back out to my mom after 6 years of not talking. And it wasn't like I got my mom back. It wasn't like, oh my God, it's my mom back. And like we do mom and son things.
Mm-hmm.
But I choose to believe that my mom was doing the best she could. Also, it wasn't good enough, but that's okay. Both things can be true. It has given me a way to have some perspective on her experience that, again, has made it easier for me to navigate my own life.
Dying of laughter. It's not funny. My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all this, well, you're gonna die too. Hello, 'tis Sunday. I'm recording this intro the day of the release because that's the kind of jam I'm spreading on toast this morning. That took a turn. I am surprised at this strange metaphor and yet somehow unsurprised because the things that come out of my mouth are just that way. I've been up the editing wazoo the past couple weeks. I transitioned at BuzzFeed to a producer position, which has been a lot more editing than I've ever done in my life. It's also cool because I'm producing videos that I'm in. So it's kind of what I was already doing, yet I have some more control, which is helpful. I am editing videos though, and I previously have not edited to this level. So I'm like teaching myself new editing software while editing. And it's just been one of those things where it's frustrating to have this learning curve and yet also a great opportunity. So it's like exciting but frustrating. Do you know what I mean? It's only good. It's good to know how to do this, but I'm like, oh gosh, this is due and I need to do this and I need to learn how to do this all on the same day. So it's been a little overwhelming, and yet here I am editing now my podcast. So I'm just editing 7 days a week, baby. I did just renew my BetterHelp subscription for 3 more months. I did the quarterly option because you save a ton of money doing that. This is the least amount I've ever paid for therapy, so that's exciting. If you've heard me talk about BetterHelp before, it's online virtual counseling by licensed professional therapists around the world. You set times via video, chat, or phone. It's incredible. And you pay per month, which gets you 4 50-minute sessions and unlimited chat service for unthinkable prices. So you can head to betterhelp.com/DOL for 10% off your first month of virtual therapy. Again, that's betterhelp.com/DOL. DOL is in dying of laughter, and I'll drop the link in the show notes as well. So excited to speak with Ben Whitehair today. I'm obsessed with him. He's like a friend, mentor, cool person in my life for many years now. And we had the opportunity to speak in person right before COVID. It was so nice listening to this episode because not only is the audio quality is just so great, all of my in-person interviews, but the chemistry is just so much stronger in person. I love a Zoom interview, and thank God, because podcasts can continue because of Zoom. But it's nice to speak with someone who I have a relationship with as a friend, and we were just really Juvin and groovin'. Juvin and groovin' sounded like we were somehow 2 Jews groovin'. There was only one Jew, it was me, but we were still groovin', so I'm okay with that reference. Ben Whitehair is a homeschooled Colorado cowboy turned actor entrepreneur. He goes into his childhood in this episode as a homeschooled cowboy in Colorado to like running the world. That was a jump. He doesn't run the world, but just wait. He has a passion and service for technology and the acting spaces. He previously co-founded Tuition Specialists, which saved college students $30 million. He's currently on the LA Board of SAG-AFTRA. Ben is a champion for social change through art and business. He's also the CIO of TSMA Consulting, a social media consulting company for entertainment industry professionals and businesses. He is the co-founder of Working.Actor, which has a lot of actor resources. Definitely check that out. And he's also an amazing actor. He plays FBI Agent Banks opposite Matthew McConaughey in the film Gold. He stars in the film AMELIA 2.0, and some television shows he's been on include The Night Shift, Better Call Saul, Grimm, and Manhattan, to name a few. So somehow this man does it all. He's so lovely. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Let's jump into the episode, and thank you, Ben, for sharing your story about losing your mom to breast cancer and mental illness. I think it's so important to spotlight stories where the death is not necessarily just one thing. All deaths are complicated in their own right, and we address the fact that she had both breast cancer and mental illness and how that affected his relationship, how they didn't speak for 6 years, they ultimately ended up connecting before she died again. And there's just so many nuggets of wisdom in this conversation. I appreciate Ben. Be sure to check him on Instagram. He's at Ben Whitehair. He posts inspirational, cool captions that are like little blog posts. The type of person that when you follow, you're like, this actually makes me feel better about myself, not worse. So shout out to Ben Whitehair. And when he's 80, he's going to have the cutest white hair. And I'm just waiting for that to happen. So I could be like, look, I planned this. I knew this was going to happen. And he's going to be like, okay, so did all of us. But imagine his headshot when he has white hair and he walks in and they're like, hey, he's Ben Whitehair. Also, will we be walking in? Will we be holograms at that point? That remains unclear. But what is clear is today is Sunday. I'm releasing this episode with Ben, and you will hopefully enjoy it as much as I did. Have a good weekend, all. And if you are following my weird BuzzFeed life or care to, there will be a video coming out on Tuesday that I produced and edited. And it is me reviewing different air purifiers because the air in the Bay Area is still not good. And unfortunately, the air is not good in many places in this country. So I'm reviewing air purifiers. Could you tell that I edited myself? Did it look professional? Please let me know. You can hit me up on Instagram and let me know at _Chels who else _ That's like Chels who would it be else? Or at Dying of Laughter _podcast. I want to know if I'm releasing episodes that are relevant to you in your particular situation. So please do let me know. I'm an open book. I will respond, and happy Sunday. And that's enough of an intro for now. Bye. Okay, yay. Thank you so much for coming, Ben Whitehair.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God. I'm so excited to talk to you in this fashion, although this feels very formal for our use.
It does feel a little more formal than normal, and more technology in between our faces than normal.
Mm-hmm. Right. I know, it's weird. It's like I can't really see your mouth. You could be like scowling right now and I wouldn't know.
I'm not. I'm smiling very largely for those who can't see us right now, which is everyone.
Which is everyone. Okay, well, to start things off, I love to ask people about their goldfish moment, which means the moment where you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was their goldfish. Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
Interesting. I don't have a great exact memory of my childhood that way. Like I think people have different orientations to time, sort of past, present, and future. And some people are really able to have deep recall. My brother's that way. My dad, he'll bring up things that happened in our childhood. And I'm like, oh my God, I would have never remembered that in a million years. But what I do remember is we had pets growing up. And I do remember our parents had this book, The 10th Good Thing About Barney, which I highly recommend. I buy it for any of my friends. If they lose a pet, I'll buy them this book. And it's like a kid's book about them doing this funeral for their pet and talking about like the 10 great things about the pet. And, thinking back, I'm like, that's a pretty wonderful, healthy way of navigating, learning about like pets sometimes die. I do have some other distinct memories of we had to put down a dog that we had gotten that was became like it had been abused, and so it ended up being very violent. Like I remember that was a strong memory. I think that was the same day our parents told us they were getting divorced, actually. And then I lived on a ranch for a while, and then animals died all the time, and that was just like it became very, very normal.
Interesting. Did you find that you became less sensitive to death when you had lost so many animals in a row, or was it always challenging each time?
I think so. I mean, there was a certain acceptance that was almost necessitated because it was just part of life, and it was part of the point. Like we were raising these animals to be eaten, and you knew that from the get-go. So we would name, like I remember we named some of our cows and things like T-bone or McDonald's or chicken fried steak.
Amazing.
And so it was just part of the context, and in a very healthy way of like from birth to raising it to on the dinner table. Like it was, that was part of it. Like we were raising these animals and using all of them and eating them. And, but yeah, definitely there was I don't even know if it's lack of sensitivity, because I don't know that it's, I'm not sensitive to what's happening, but more practice I think a lot of this is really about practice. And so we certainly had a lot more practice.
Right. Than someone that hadn't lost a bunch of sheep. Speaking of sheep, I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience in the suburbs of Colorado. Tell us, for those that don't know, who you grew up with, where you were, a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Colorado. I had a pretty wonderful, what you might think of a standard suburban, white, upper middle class upbringing, and started homeschooling. So I homeschooled for what ended up being about 6 years.
Which is not,
Which
I
is
would say,
now
it's not typical
normal.
at
So
all.
then that became not normal.
Mhm.
And it was a philosophy of called unschooling, which is a very self-taught, self-directed approach to schooling, as opposed to like, I have all this knowledge, I'm going to teach it to you. It's very much the world is your oyster, and what do you want to learn about? And us as parents will help facilitate that learning. It was very experiential. We took a month, we traveled the Oregon Trail. We went back
What?
east, we visited all the battlefields. It was very unstructured. There was no homework. It was homeschooling, so it was all homework. But it was very self-taught and really engendered a sense of like ownership of our education. So grew up in the suburbs. As I mentioned, parents got divorced. My mom moved out to the boonies. Her eventual second husband was a cowboy, so we ended up living on a ranch and going from suburban, normal childhood to now living on a ranch, learning how to be a cowboy. I was a bull rider. I was a champion dairy cow showman. I was also a champion sheep showman. Sheep are idiots. I don't recommend anybody get one if you want to show it. If it's just sitting there, it's fine. But here's the thing: they're idiots and they're obstinate. Cows are not that smart, but they're not obstinate. They're whatever. But sheep are obstinate. I'm not a fan. But so I sold my
Oh my
champion
God.
sheep, and I used that money to buy parts to build a computer, like most kids, and got really into technology. And so I was sort of living these two crazy parts of my life where I was living on a ranch most of the time. I was going back up to the suburbs with my dad part-time, building computers, being a cowboy. And the cowboy stepdad, was gifted with animals. So all of us 3 kids became gifted horse riders and rodeo champions and all of that. And then he and my mom had a surprise baby, my sister Felina. And ultimately, to sort of fast forward a little bit, my stepdad committed murder-suicide, and that there was a lot of like childhood abuse and trauma all wrapped up in that experience on the ranch. And then before my sophomore year of high school, I ended up moving in with my dad and going to a big public high school, and then having a little bit more of like normal public high school suburbs. Got super involved in theater, and I was a huge nerd and a really good student. And that eventually took me lots of places of starting companies and being an actor in LA and all of that.
So we have nothing to talk about.
Yeah, sorry.
I can't think of anything to ask you.
Well, this has been great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
That was fun. See you on the other side. I mean, I love how you started this off by saying, you know, I had what you would consider a very typical.
Well, I did until it got on, and then it got very non-traditional.
Well, it's really, I mean, it's very an interesting story, because when you meet you today, you're so well spoken, extremely intelligent. You're also very artistic. You're an actor and entrepreneur.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, you seem to have so much of life figured out, and then when you start to peel back the layers, knowing that you've gone through all these difficult and interesting experiences it's quite fascinating, because you don't project that you have like the energy of having been through all of this.
Well, I'm very grateful. My mom was an incredible mother, particularly up until about the divorce. And my dad was there. He was a lawyer, so he worked a lot. So he wasn't, again, like what you might think of like dad's off working a lot and mom's home. But they were both very present. I mean, they're super intelligent people. So I got a really good foundation. And then, well, we can get more into this. So my mom then became not so great of a mother. A lot of mental illness, became night and day different person than she was, who I was used to growing up. Since she passed away 6 years ago, I think now. But looking back, I had such a strong foundation. And during the like super traumatic, painful years of my adolescence, my dad really, really stepped up. And so he was around and was providing a healthy example of parenting. So I had at least one super healthy parent for basically all of my life. And I had somewhere else to go. I think when I moved out of my mom's in with my dad, I mean, it felt like a necessity at the time to sort of save myself in the way that I was looking at it and having the life that I wanted. But a lot of people don't have that opportunity. They don't have another parent they can go live with or a relative or anything. And so as as hard as it was, I'm very grateful that I had some of these alternatives to a have healthy examples still, and have an escape really.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, I think it's such a healthy perspective that you have, and that's, I mean, you seem to have really processed a lot of your experiences in such a healthy way. And later I want to talk a little bit more about how you as an adult have transitioned to doing the things you're doing and all the cool training you've had. But to go back for a second, I would love to hear more about what it was like to first having moved to the boonies, and what was it like having a mom who had mental illness, and when did that come into play? Was that around the time of your stepfather's death?
It was so my parents got divorced when I was like 11, close to when I was 12. And I would say my mom's uh transition, if you will, happened over the course of those coming years. We think she had borderline personality disorder along with probably some other things. And it similar to the abuse that was happening, um, and her sort of mental decline, uh, it's pretty textbook in that it doesn't happen all at once. You know,
Mhm.
you don't sort of wake up and be like, "Oh my God, everything's different." It's very, very slow, and that's partly how it works. Especially, looking at abuse. I mean, it's so sadly, but textbook. And it was, looking back, I'm like, I can recognize the signs now. I mean, I've been working with and counseling, coaching some friends who've been in abusive relationships and otherwise, and it's like ultimately very, very predictable. And one of the pieces of that is that it doesn't start off that way. It often starts off very positively, and often abusers or some of these people are very charismatic and loving. There's great aspects of their personality, and it's easy to get sucked into that. And then it just slowly over time changes. And I look back, there were a couple moments that caused me to sort of wake up to that and go, oh my gosh, how did we get here? Like, this is so far away from where we were. I remember I was in the car driving with my mom, and there's some other people in the car, and she was saying that it basically wasn't okay for gay people to get married. And that was so different because growing up, we were so progressive, so liberal. My mom was president of CU Boulder, the most
She
liberal,
was?
yeah, the student body president. She got her
Wow.
MBA. She's wicked smart and super liberal progressive in the 70s. All of our godparents were gay. That was just part of growing up. It's like, yeah, some people are gay, some people are not.
Right.
Everybody loves each other. It's all good. So
Mhm.
I like that as a moment. I remember going, wait, what? Like, our godparents are gay. The people who would ostensibly raise us if you die, and now you're saying like it's not okay. What? So there were some of those moments that woke me up to, oh my God, we are so far away from healthy space. And eventually, sort of enough of those things happened that I ultimately was like, I have to get out. So I did, and so I moved back in with my dad, um, and then my stepdad. He sort of what my mom and him had gotten divorced, and he was off in New Mexico and dating other people, and then we sort of found out. I don't even remember how, but that he had committed murder suicide. The woman he was dating after my mom, they got in some fight. She drove off. He chased her down, ran her off the road, shot her, and then killed himself. And
Wow.
it it's interesting because in a way, one of the things I've learned about grief and death as I've moved forward is that particularly when an abuser dies, there's often a sense of relief. And I think that's okay. One of the lessons for me is that there's no right or wrong way to experience death, grief, trauma, and and it's particularly complicated when it's an abuser or someone who wasn't, didn't treat you well. Or, I have very mixed emotions around my mom's death because she was really such a wonderful part of my childhood and growing up in that foundation. But by the end, she was not a good person. Like on par, she was not making people's lives better. And while there's a lot of sadness there, what I also believe to be true is that a lot of us kids, including my little sister Felina, who was then raised by my sister Nikki for the last couple years of high school, have better lives than we would have had my mom still been alive. And I think it's okay to be in recognition of that.
Mhm.
And I think what's challenging is holding both realities sometimes of like, and it's taken me a lot to practice to remember, like, actually, there were a lot of great things about my mom because there was so much trauma around it. And the parts that I really remember were like the not great parts. But looking back, I'm like, yeah, actually, she was amazing. We had such a great childhood. And so much of my foundation is because of her and how great she was. And that can be true. And there can be this horrible trauma and horrible behavior that was unacceptable and not okay. And both of those things are true.
It's so well said. And I mean, it's amazing that you recognize that. And I think for people who also have mixed emotions around a parent's death, that's going to be really helpful and inspiring to hear. What might you say to someone who has recently lost a parent that also was a victim of abuse or has mixed emotions around their upbringing?
I I think part of it's what I said, which is that there's no right or wrong way to experience it. And I think there's both societal pressures, and lots of people will often say, well, this is the way to do it, or this is the way to do it, or you should feel this way, or should feel that way. The should, I think, is a dirty word. So that if you hear should, beware.
Hmm.
But knowing that there's no right or wrong way, there's no playbook, and your experience might be very different. And also that one of the things that supported me was choosing to believe that people had the best intentions when they were sharing with me in those ways, that they weren't saying those things because they were trying to harm me. Often it's because they were in pain, right? Or I've had people reach out and say, gosh, you really shouldn't talk about your mom that way. And for me, I'm like, I'm just being honest about
Hmm.
my experience. She was my mom, so I think if anybody has a right to do it, like
Right.
I do, like I'm
Right.
sorry, random Facebook friend of hers, like she's my mom. I think if anyone has a right to talk about it, I
Right.
do. But also knowing that those people, like not taking it personally and just knowing that it may come down to setting boundaries for yourself and knowing like if you've lost someone and you're in that space, there may be times where you need to remove yourself from situations or conversations or just beware, not even beware, but be mindful that people were not taught how to deal with grief. And so other people may not be doing it very well with you, and that's okay. And to just be gentle with yourself and know that it's on you to set some boundaries and be aware of what you can and can't handle in any given moment, and that can change. I mean, all of these things I'm sharing have been a lot of practice, and it comes and goes. Most days I'm pretty at peace, and then I'll be sitting in yoga or something and I'll, get really sad or I'll be watching This Is Us, my God, and weeping, and
Yeah.
people are dealing with death and these other pieces, and that's okay that it comes in different waves. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do that.
I would still like to hear a little bit more about how you felt when your stepdad died. So, first, I mean, that's a huge deal, what you just said. I mean, how did you feel when that happened? And how old were you? And how did you move through that death? And how long after was your mom's death from that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the exact timing. What I will say is that I was pretty removed because I had moved out of my mom's house, and then within a couple years they got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't talking to Mike, my
Mm-hmm.
stepdad. And then I ended up going through a period as well, and I think that's when I found out so I didn't talk to my mom for 6 years. She had tried to hire someone to kill my dad, and a lot
Your
of
biological dad,
yes, my
not
biological
Mike.
dad, correct. No, the two of them kind of I think were trying to, I don't know.
Do you
I think
think
there's
that
life insurance or something they were trying to get that they thought they would.
really?
Yeah, he had spent a bunch of time in federal prison and was kind of a member of the mafia, and those were a lot of
Wait,
his friends.
what? Wait,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, back up for a second. So, do you think that your mom's mental health issues were a contributing factor in her choosing this man as a partner because your dad is
It's an
not this
interesting
way?
question.
Or
I think in a way they all contributed to each other, right? I do think some
okay.
of the abuse triggered some of the mental health stuff that maybe wouldn't have been as pronounced had she not been, being abused and in this traumatic
So
situation.
he was abusive to
Yes,
her
to
as
her and
well.
us kids.
I'm so
Um,
sorry. I mean, that's
Thank
horrible.
you.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side of it.
Hmm.
I'm very grateful because it made me who I am, and I would go back and choose it again. Had things turned out differently, had either of my siblings committed suicide, which was something that they tried, um, had that actually gone through, or had some other traumatic things happened, I don't know if I would feel the way I do now. But looking at it from my standpoint now, it's it's taught me so much and given me a way to connect with people that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so from this vantage point today, I can go say, yeah, you know what, I would go back and go through it again. I don't know if I don't know if I would still say that had my brother committed suicide. I don't know. Um, but I do think that it all sort of contributed to it itself. Mental illness, abuse, like it sort of became this pretty wicked cycle um, that I think ultimately was part of her demise.
Hmm. And yeah, my intention's not just to ask you question after question, just to get to like a certain, like vantage point of your story, but for someone who themselves has been abused
Hmm.
by a parent or step parent, can you speak to that experience or something you learned from that or a suggestion you might have for that person? My goal is for them to be able to
Yeah,
relate to you and not just to ask for the sake of asking,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
Well, first of all, it sucks. It's not fair. It is awful. All of those things are true, and part of the journey I think is being allowed to feel that way. That like, yeah, this is shitty. It sucks and shouldn't be happening or shouldn't have happened. That is 100% correct. And the question is, what is available to do about it? Um, I mean, if you're currently in an abusive situation, seeking professional help, there's great therapists and psychologists who have access to other resources. There's shelters and hotlines and all of that to like navigate getting out of an abusive situation, which is often a hard part, particularly, the level of control that most abusers have, and they tend to cut off your relationships to friends and family and support systems. Like that's part of how the abuse continues. So if you're in the middle of it, finding some professional resources to figure out a safe way to get out of it, and finding other support because most people who leave kind of get sucked back in and it continues the cycle. It's just that tends to be what happens. So, if you're in the midst of it, finding professional help and a network of other people to support you in navigating to getting to safe space. I mean, that's the first part, right? And then once you are out of the immediately abusive environment, or if we're in that space and someone's passed, um, I think what has supported me is looking at it as a journey and knowing that it's a practice. I think grief is a verb and it's something that I practice. And finding the healthy ways to express my grief. I know for me, I think people tend to fall on one end of a spectrum, either um, shutting down as a coping mechanism or like lashing, not even necessarily lashing out, but like the opposite end of the emotional spectrum where like the emotions come pouring out all the time. And I personally tend to be on the end of the spectrum of shutting down as a coping mechanism. And that did not work. I mean, it did to get through the abuse, right? And I think that's part of something to recognize is these coping mechanisms we develop often were really successful. I got through my childhood and some horrible situations because of these coping mechanisms I developed. So
Hmm.
they were really effective at the time. The challenge is now that I'm an adult and I'm in a romantic relationship, say, that romantic partner is not my mother. That romantic partner is not my stepdad. And so those coping mechanisms that flare up when I'm feeling attacked or defensive or just triggered or whatever are no longer effective. But being able to thank, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old me, say, hey, thank you for all these coping mechanisms that got us through it. They worked. Congratulations. And we're not in that situation anymore. And
Hmm.
me shutting down because I'm afraid of being vulnerable when my romantic partner wants to connect is actually not serving me and not healthy. And so, I've done a lot of personal development both, experiential workshops. I did a program called MITT that was life changing. That's ultimately what allowed me to reach back out and start talking to my mom and gave me those tools to deal with my own anger, sadness, grief, pain, and really to take my power back. I think so much. People talk a lot about forgiveness and forgiving an abuser or these other people. For me, forgiveness was about setting myself free. They say resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. And what I was
Mm-hmm.
realizing was, I was in a space where I was sabotaging sort of subconsciously, right? My relationships and other parts of my life because of what I'd gone through. And I was like, wait a second, that's only hurting me. That's not hurting my mom. That's not hurting my stepdad. He's gone. Like these people are not in my life. And it's about me and what life I'm creating and what I'm doing with that. And so recognizing like getting to the point where I was able to process my grief and pain to the point where I could start practicing. Again, I think it's a practice and an ongoing thing to forgive my mom for my own sake. Honestly, not for her really. I sort of like a side benefit, but it was really about me and having freedom of my own expression and my own actions and my own relationships in a way to take my power back and to say, I've every time that I react to a situation or a person in a way that's unhealthy because of what I went through, I'm essentially giving that power to the abuse again and to practice. I was not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm still working on it. It still comes up. I still notice
Yeah.
these things. I will be navigating them probably till the day I die. I just continue to get, I think, more effective at it. But to when that comes up to go, yeah, you know what? I'm actually taking my power back here. And I am in this moment practicing forgiveness. I'm practicing setting uh, this person free. I know for me, a phrase that was really effective is that I choose to believe, whether it's true or not, I choose to believe that my mom was doing the best she could. Also, it wasn't good enough, but that's okay. Both things can be true. That she was doing the best she could with what she knew. It wasn't good enough. Both of those things are true, but that it has given me a way to have some perspective on her experience um, that, again, has made it easier for me to navigate my own life. So again, ultimately ended up reaching back out to my mom after 6 years of not talking. And it wasn't like I got my mom back. It wasn't like, oh my God, it's my mom back. And like we do mom and son things.
Mm-hmm.
But it gave me the opportunity, I'm trying to remember the timing for I think a couple of years to at least say the things out loud to her that I'd wanted to say. And I didn't often get the responses that I would have wanted. It wasn't, you're right, son, I'm so sorry. And this, that's not the response I got. But being able to express what I needed to express was so powerful. And I think it can be done if the other person has already passed away. I don't think they have to be living to be able to do that. But
Oh, I love that.
but for me, I'm glad that I was able to have that opportunity because I do think it makes it a little bit easier. But for anybody listening who's going, oh my God, I have all these unsaid things and they're gone now, I think that process is still available to us.
I love that. That's really powerful. What was the process like in reaching back out to her, and what was something that you did say to her, and how was that received?
Well, I action cures fear, not the other way around in my experience. And part of it was I think it was when I was in that leadership program and I had gone through a lot of processing my own emotions and I had basically declared that, that would be a powerful breakthrough for me. And so I just called her.
Mhm.
I remember I was sitting in my car, I think up in North Hollywood. I was outside of a coffee shop and I just called her and she picked up the phone. And I honestly don't remember much about that conversation.
And it had
Um,
really been 6 years.
yeah,
That's
it had
such
been
a long
6 years.
time. Wow.
And when she passed away, all four of us kids were in the hospital. It was a very quick thing. She had breast cancer, but
Right, with that, which
she
is a whole other
yeah,
can of
and she'd
worms.
had double mastectomy and was in remission, but then her mental illness, I mean, she basically decided that she didn't have breast cancer and like the doctors were just trying to steal her money. So she never paid her medical bills and she never went back to the
Whoa.
doctor. So then the cancer came roaring back and she hadn't been to a doctor in years. And so it was basically 10 days from when she finally ended up back in the hospital to when she passed. And all four of us kids ended up being in the same room. And that was the first time that was the case in 10 years. All four of us kids had not been in the same room for 10 years.
Wow.
And I honestly believe had myself and my brother and sister not gone through this personal development work, I don't think that would have happened.
Can you speak to MITT or the personal development work? Like, what was that like?
Yeah.
How did you find it? Would you recommend someone else do this program? Like, tell us about that.
It is the thing that has probably single-handedly been the most powerful for me. So from that standpoint, like, yes, and
Yeah.
my whole
Yes.
family's gone through it. My friends have gone through it. I mean, look, I think there's a lot of paths to finding some of these elements of peace and these tools and other things. For me, it's very experiential, and that was really important. Like, I'd read the books, I knew the concepts, right? I could tell you intellectually these things, but for me, the breakthrough was about feeling it in my body. It was about living it in my life. It was about practicing that vulnerability with my girlfriend at the time. It was about practicing, like, calling my mom. It's like I could intellectually tell you, like, well, she was doing the best she could and I forgive her. But going through that process, like, physically in my body, and in the real world is what was so transformative about it. And part of it is just, like any of these kinds of programs, it's a condensed thing where you're putting yourself in that environment to really focus on navigating these kinds of things in a condensed way. I for anybody who's thinking about doing it, I think you have to be in a mentally healthy place. So if you're still navigating suicide or alcoholism or, in therapy and dealing with, high levels of your own mental health challenges, like, I would say, no, start with those and work on getting to a healthier baseline before you do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in that space, whatever it is for people, for me, MIT, my friend told me about it. I just met her and she went through it and I noticed a huge change and I was like, oh, cool. Like, what was it? I'll do it. It was fun.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, this completely changed my life. And a lot of it, what it did was it was a catalyst, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's up to us to do the work. I'm sure there's people who've gone through the program and are like, well, it was stupid and I didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah.
Like with anything, what you put into it is what you get out of it. And I really took it on of like an opportunity to navigate those things that I'd been ignoring, frankly. Like, I was healthy, my life was good, I had good work, I was moving up in my career, but there was so much pain and anger that I hadn't dealt with and so much grief that I hadn't actually felt. Again, I'm on that like clamp down end of the spectrum. And so practicing, like, actually having these emotional experiences and talking about it and sharing about it and exploring what did I think and feel and where had that come from, I think was so valuable. I look at people on the other end of that spectrum too, and I think there's the other side of that is if your emotions are so overflowing that you can't navigate them, I think it's a different set of tools, but it's the same breakdown. It just looks different, right? For me, it's about
Mm-hmm.
shutting down. And so my practice has been opening up. I think for other people, it's like, emotional vomit all the time in ways that are unhealthy and finding ways, okay, how do I
Right.
actually navigate that in a healthy way? And how do I actually move through these emotions and be able to take different actions and have those tools? So again, I think it looks different for different people, and that's okay as well.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I've spoken with you before about how some of your coping mechanisms were about shutting down, but you're so well spoken. You're so eloquent. Like, you wouldn't necessarily assume that that was a coping mechanism that you once had.
Well, and part of it is, even before I had done that, I was really good about talking about it. Like, I was able to tell you the facts as if I were reading the encyclopedia. Well, this happened, and my stepdad this, and my mom this, and whatever. But it took a lot of work to actually feel and be in that experience and be willing with myself to go there and to feel those things. It also took a lot to like my continued practice is to actually be vulnerable. Like, I can do vulnerable, right? Like, oh, great, 2:00, let's get together, 30 minutes, I'll be vulnerable. It's great, I'll pencil you in. But about saying, how can I actually move through life that way? And the irony as an actor is like, that's what I get paid to do, right? Is to be open and vulnerable and to be able to share those parts of myself that as a kid, this is what happens with most of us. We have experiences and then we make up beliefs about it, right? My belief was I'm not lovable or I'm not enough, right? And so I worked so hard to prove that I'm enough to my mom or whatever that is. But to be able to open up and share that or share those moments that are hard or share the parts of myself or the things I've done that I'm not proud of in safe spaces and learning how, like, what is it to create a safe space and what is it to have healthy boundaries around it. But but that being vulnerable is very different than doing or talking vulnerable. And that's
Right.
been my journey.
And that's so powerful that you share this also as a man in 2020. You
Mm.
know, like I would say you're much more in touch with your emotions than a lot of men that I know. I hope that's fair to say. And I say that in the most complimentary way. So
Yeah.
I wish more men could take a page from your book and do some of this work because it's really inspiring.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up, especially when I look at being on the ranch, there were many elements of it that were really wonderful, and I learned a lot. And there was a lot of pieces of masculinity that were, I think, honorable and about respect and commitment and loyalty and these other values that were there. But there was also a lot of very unhealthy masculinity. And part of my journey's been unpacking that and looking at what is healthy and what's unhealthy. And I think men are very rarely given space to be vulnerable. And often, Brene Brown talks about this. She says, a lot of times women say they want the vulnerability, but then when they experience it, they don't know what to do with it. I
Mm,
don't think we're giving men space and teaching them how to be vulnerable, and I don't think we're teaching women particularly how to be in that space. And because I do think it's what often everybody wants deep down.
right.
Um, but so finding people who help you practice, my first girlfriend out here in LA was great with that, and I will forever be grateful because she was one of the first times where she created a safe space for me to explore that, she went through all kinds of pain. There's all kinds of pain that she experienced because of me and because of those coping mechanisms, and she stuck around and created a space and was willing to be there in it with me. And I was able to start practicing in a safe space and with my friends and in the leadership program. And I'm very grateful to the people I have in my life where I got to start practicing and opening up. And what I've learned is the great paradox and irony of human behavior is that generally, if we are behaving because we're afraid of something, we create that thing we're afraid of. So, for example, I shut down my emotions when I'm feeling afraid because I'm worried, for example, that people won't like me. So I shut down and I don't show people all of myself because I'm like, oh God, if they knew that, they wouldn't like me. And I want people to like me. So I shut that part down. What do people experience? They experience someone who's being inauthentic and shutting down, and then they don't like me. Whereas what I'm afraid of, right, is if I share these pieces of me, no one will accept me. But when I practice doing it anyway, I actually get the thing that I'm wanting, which is that people go, oh, wow, this person is being open and sharing and vulnerable. Oh my God, that's who I want to connect with. Wow, I really respect, admire, appreciate that. And so then it creates the connection that I'm actually looking for. So for me, it's been a practice of whenever I get afraid to share something, for example, or if I'm in a relationship and I'm like, oh, nope, can't share that. To me, that's a reminder that is the thing that I get to share. That is where I get to go. Like when that fear comes up, oh no, all right, okay, I actually get to go there. That's where
Mhm.
the growth is. That's where I'm going to create the kinds of relationships that I care about.
Hey, popping in quickly to recommend my new virtual therapy company that I'm obsessed with. I started doing therapy online virtually with this company, BetterHelp. HELP. And I was super against doing virtual therapy because I was like, that's weird. And the whole point is to connect in person. But I decided to give it a try. And I don't know what else to say besides I cannot recommend it enough. Everyone is a licensed professional therapist. And something I like about it is that all these therapists have been doing virtual therapy before COVID. So there's no technical issues. They totally understand. These are people that have committed to virtual counseling long before it was a thing or before everyone else did. Over 500,000 other people have already done it. And if you use code DOL, you'll get 10% off your first month. BetterHelp.com/DOL. Again, that's betterhelp.com/DOL, like dying of laughter, DOL. I couldn't be more proud to partner with them and to recommend them. I personally use it. I personally love it. And I hope you do too. That's amazing. If there's someone who wants to practice vulnerability, perhaps in a deeper way or for the first time, Do you have a recommendation for one small step that person can take to share more vulnerably in their own life?
Yes. I think part of it starts with being honest with ourselves. I think I spent a lot of my time pretending not to know certain things, sort of lying to myself, if you will, and not even in a sort of judgmental way, but just that's where my journey had led me. And to start to go, wow, you know what? There is pain here, or there is sadness here, or I am shutting down here, or I am not being honest with this person in my life. So I journal every day. I've journaled basically every single day for the last almost 10 years, I think.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and that's been helpful to just get the things in my brain out and to practice being honest with myself. You know, if you can't be honest with yourself in a journal, like if you catch yourself being dishonest in your journal, like, oh, okay, all right, that's a place I get to look at. And so I think it starts with that. And then I think the next piece is finding the person, or hopefully persons, but even just that one person in your life who you trust to start to open up and to be able to just even say, hey, this might sound super weird, but I'm practicing being vulnerable. Will you support me in that? And if they say no, great. Now you know, and you'll find someone else who will.
They're like,
But there's
no,
a pretty
bro.
good chance. Yeah, they might, no,
not
bro,
into
that's not
that.
my thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Now you know. Let's go practice with someone else first. But the person you probably are going to get a very positive response. And I think it just comes down to practice. For me, some of that's been on social media and sharing things that I was afraid to share because I was like, oh God, what will people think? And like, I remember, so I wrote a blog post, the top 10 things I learned about my mother's death after she passed away.
I absolutely remember it.
Yeah.
It was
And
fantastic.
it was really important to me to write. And then, so I have this email list that I send out to mostly people in entertainment, like mostly my actor community and casting directors. And I was like, oh God, I can't share that with them. And then I was like, came back to like, well, why am I an actor in the first place? And I was like, well, really it's to give people permission to be the best version of themselves and to live the life of their dreams and to share and be vulnerable. And I was like, well, that's what this blog post does. And that's why I'm an actor. So you know what? F it. I'm going to share, even though who knows what'll happen. Like I was afraid to do it. But when I shared it with that community, I got more positive response from that. And probably if, you know, the cosmos could look at it, I bet I got more career benefit out of it, which is not why I was doing it, right?
Yeah.
To be clear, that's not, well, I'm going to share this blog post about my dead mom so I can book an acting job. It was like, no, there's this piece of me that is important for me to share with the world. And I was so afraid to share it. But when I did, again, like the more I've practiced, the more it's been almost always received well. And that's made it easier to keep doing that. It is still a practice. It's not always received well. You can't control how people respond. You may share vulnerably and someone may freak out. That doesn't mean you should stop sharing vulnerably, right? That's what our brain wants. Oh no, see, I could never share this in a million years, right? But with that practice, I have found, you know, over the years, I go, yeah, the more that I've done it, the more that it's opened up. I've made more money in business. I've had deeper relationships. I've transformed all of the relationships with my family. I have deeper connections, all of those things because I practiced and was able to take a look like, okay, what do I actually care about? And let me practice that. And it didn't always go well. It wasn't always perfect. I don't always get the responses that I want. And it's imperfect in my sharing often. And that's okay. Like that's part of the journey. And knowing from the start, like telling yourself, this is not going to be perfect. It may come out weird, but what's important is that I just take one small step. One other quick thing that I found to be really powerful is writing a letter or writing an email that you don't send. And maybe it's to someone who passed away, maybe it's to someone who's living, but practicing like actually sharing the thoughts that you have and the pieces that are painful, the pieces that make you happy, whatever that is, like getting it out of your brain onto a piece of paper, onto a Word document, onto something that's out of your brain, I think is really, really, really powerful.
Is that something, you said you journal every single day. Do you ever write to your mom or stepdad at this stage? Do you ever explore that in your journal, or does it feel like something that's in the past and you've moved forward and doesn't necessarily entail that kind of exploration? I'm just curious. I'm thinking about what I even do in my own journal with my dad, so I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah. Not as much anymore. Like I think it was probably something that I did a lot especially early on in my grief process.
Yeah.
So not as much anymore, but again, like I remember I was in hot yoga and I was sitting and the music played, and then all of a sudden this like memory of my mom, and I just started
Mm-hmm.
crying. And I've had that experience where I'm like watching, again, it often comes up in art where I'm watching someone or like a family experience, or maybe it's around death, right? Like Kobe Bryant passing away, like just that grief, it's a trigger. Like I remember the hospital and I remember being there with my mom and I remember the funeral, like when I have these emotional experiences. And I was actually thinking about that this past week with Kobe dying, and I was like, feeling so much sadness. And I was journaling actually because I remember thinking, and I still have this experience where there are parts of me that are more sad around Kobe's death than when my mom died. And part of that was that
Whoa.
I had experienced the emotional death of my mom years before she physically passed away.
Oh,
So
that's
like
interesting.
I had already spent years and years and years navigating like the emotional death of my mom, right? I didn't talk to her for 6 years, and she became a very different person, right? So a lot of the grief was like grieving who my mom used to be. And so I did that for many, many, many years. So it's not that I didn't experience sadness when she died, but it was different than like if one of my close friends died, or if my dad died, or even Kobe Bryant. I know Kobe Bryant. I'm not even a huge basketball
Right.
fan, but like the collective grief that has been happening and what he meant to so many people and what he represented, like just being in that emotion has brought up those other pieces. And that again, like there's no right or wrong way. I'm like, yeah, there are parts of me that have had a more sort of different kind of sadness than when my mom died, and that's okay. Like that, and part of it is probably that's part of my grief that's in my body from my mom that's coming out when this is happening, and that's okay.
Absolutely. That was actually an episode last week I had read. One of my solo episodes was just this piece that um, a therapist had posted on her Instagram about why we grieve celebrities. And
Mm,
I just kind of reflected on that and read it out loud. And it's like what you're saying. There's very few things in our life that will reflect the same feelings in our body that we experienced when we were grieving. And that is brought up. And then, of course, you're seeing other people posting and sharing and talking about their sadness, which is kind of a domino effect. And also the reminder of our own mortality on a either conscious or subconscious level.
yeah,
So
100%. And
interesting.
I also navigated. There were very credible allegations of sexual assault from him, right? And I that was something that was really alive for me too. Was like, how is that woman experiencing this, right? And part of what I think is challenging when someone passes away, particularly if it was someone who was abusive or anything in that realm, often there are lots of other people who did not have that experience. And especially like familial abuse or otherwise is generally pretty hidden. That's partly how it perpetuates, right? But so,
Mm-hmm.
there are people, when my mom died, as a perfect example, lots of people, oh my God, like you must be so sad. That's so awful. She was so great. She was the best mom. And I'm sitting here going, nope, that was not my
Right.
experience. Certainly not for many years. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. And that in a healthy way, I've been able to go, you know what, other people are allowed their own experience, including my little sister, Felina, who had a very different experience of my mom growing up than we did. And like, that's okay. And she's allowed to have her experience. I'm allowed to have mine. And I don't need everybody. But there's a part of me, like my ego wants people to like hate my mom for certain things because I'm like, this, she did this thing and it was awful and you all should be upset too. So like
Mm-hmm.
that part of my ego flares up, and there's that part of me sometimes. And what I remind myself is like, I get to navigate my own relationship around this. I get to set boundaries. And for me, one of my boundaries was like, I'm not going to lie.
Right.
One of the painful things about my mom in her later years was there was so much pretending, like everything's okay. Let's pretend that nothing is wrong. I'm like, there's all kind of shit that's wrong. How are we not talking about this? Like this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was really important that I was able to be honest. And that didn't mean that I had to electively overshare with someone and that I didn't have to rob them of their experience. If they said, oh, your mom, she was so great, I miss her. I didn't need to interject and go, yeah, well, she was this horrible person and she did these awful things. But I was also able to remind myself, like, that doesn't invalidate my experience. Both can be true. And also that I'm allowed to be honest about my experience, and also to share it from the standpoint of like, it's just my experience. That person who had a great experience with my mom, that was their experience, and that is true also.
Mm-hmm.
But I can also share, yeah, you know what? Like my experience was actually pretty different, and it's been pretty challenging to navigate that, right? I can choose how much or little I want to share in any given moment, but for me, it was really important that I don't feel like I'm ever lying about what my experience was. And part of what's helped me do that is to say, to put just even in the language like that this was my experience. My experience of her was this. My experience of her was this. Someone else's might be different. That's okay. Those can both be true, but being true to what I went through and being willing to share that.
You're so mature. Sorry, this is such a random thing to say. But like, I mean, good for you. I mean, that's I don't know the right word. It's a generous thing to say. I mean, as the son of your mom, the fact that you're, honoring other people's experiences, it's very worldly. It's very mature. I could see someone else not necessarily resonating that way.
Well,
So,
and that's okay. Part of it
right.
I would say is a journey. Like it's still a practice, right? It still comes up sometimes. Or,
Yeah.
like or my little sister be dealing with something. I'm like, oh God, Mom, you really shat the bed on that one, right? Or, I look at I've people, dealing with horrible health insurance bills or something, and it reminds me of all this stuff we went through. And I'm like, ugh, that sucks. Like that was so shitty.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have those moments. It's not that I don't. And I just think the more that I have practiced my navigating my own experience, and again, that verb of like forgiveness for my own life, not for my mom's dead. My personal belief about what happens when we die, like I think there's a lot of cool things like, oh wow, if that is what happens, that would be really cool. But I have no way of knowing. So for me, it's about who's living. And like we honored my mom's wishes through her funeral. After that, I think it's about who's left. Like we honored my mom, we gave her the funeral she wanted. We honored the request she had about that. But really, like she's dead. She is not experiencing this. She's not in these relationships. She's not on my social media post, right? Maybe in some,
As far
afterlife
as
kind of
we know.
way,
Yeah.
but like
Right.
as far as we know, like
Right.
she's not here at the table. My
Right.
romantic partner is, my brother is, my sister, the people in my life. And so how do we create a healthy experience that hopefully honors that, but if nothing else, creates a healthy navigation of that process for those who are still left?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true. I probably will edit out that I just said that because I sounded weird. But yes, I absolutely agree. Was there um was there something in particular that you choose to share about your decision to no longer speak to your mom, or is there a piece of advice you'd have for someone who might be struggling with a similar decision?
Yeah.
What advice would you have for someone who might be unsure if they should continue their own relationship?
Well, it's first of all, honor and acknowledge that it's really challenging, right? To even be thinking about that, it's just hard. It means that there's a lot of really challenging, often crappy things happening. So being, recognizing like, yeah, that sucks. I wish it were different.
Mhm.
I often tell people, or when we learn that someone's dying, there's often nothing you can say. For me, the phrase that's been helpful when I'm like, I don't know what to say is I wish it were different. I do. I wish it were different. Like, I'm also, though, aware that we can't necessarily change it. Certain health, like this person, may be passing, and it may be just a matter of time. And like, that's sad and shitty. And I wish it were different. And knowing that my personal belief is we don't owe anybody anything. And I think, particularly with parents, particularly with a mother, I think there's so much societal pressure. It's like, well, but it's your mom. And I'm like, yeah. And she tried to kill my dad. Like, I
That
get
is
that it's my
so
mom,
heavy,
but like,
Ben. Oh my
th-
god.
I, but so there's a lot of societal, well, but it's your mom, oh, but it's your parent, well, it's your brother. And you might be like, yeah, and he raped me, and this horrible thing happened. So listening to your own voice about what is a boundary for you at that moment and knowing that it can change. For
Yeah.
me, it got to a point where I did not have the tools at the time, and uh, and my experience was that in order to be talking to my mom, I had to pretend like everything was okay. And anytime the real things that mattered came up, she would not have those conversations. And I got to a point where it was making me crazy. I was like, I cannot keep doing this because it's not healthy for me,
Yeah.
because I'm having to live this pretend life, and I'm not okay with that. That level of secrecy is what got our family into all these horrible situations, and I'm no longer willing to do that. And what that meant was I couldn't talk to my mom, and certainly not with the tools that I had. Fast forward 6 years, personal development, I'm more mature, and I had more tools to be able to interact with her in a way where I didn't need to get anything back. Do I wish my mom would have been like, "Oh my God, you're so right. This thing I did was horrible and this was that. And I love you. And I should have helped with this that I said, whatever." Yeah, of course. There's that little boy in me, that part of me that wishes I would have had that. But I was able to at least get to a point where even though I experienced hurt or sadness or pain in those moments when I wasn't getting what I wanted, I was still able to share my truth with her. And that was really important to me. That may not be important to somebody else, but knowing that you're allowed to set boundaries and you get to be really courageous with honoring what is true for you, because there are often a lot of other people, well, you should do this, or well, you can't do that, or no, well, but it's this or that. And it's like, they don't know. And you get to honor your own truth in that and to practice courage. And ideally, to listen to yourself and say, am I choosing this from a place of empowerment, from a place of what will keep me safe, from a place of, no, I'm setting this boundary, as distinct from, oh my God, I'm doing it because I should, or I'm doing it because I'm afraid, or I'm doing it because, someone else told me this is what I should do. And sometimes those voices are hard to tell. And that's part of the practice, I think, of the work that we get to do.
Well, good for you. I mean, the fact that you were able to make that decision with the tools that you had sounded like it really took care of yourself at the time. And I cannot imagine. And I think it's really courageous that you were able to move forward in the way that you did to protect yourself. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
And this is a question more about my own curiosity, and it's okay if you don't even resonate or ponder this, but just since my mom's journey with breast cancer has been so prominent for the last
Mhm.
20 years, I'm curious if her breast cancer diagnosis or journey is something that you or perhaps your sisters think about. It seems pretty separate from all the other things, but just curious if that's something that you've thought about.
Yes, and certainly for my sisters, and they've done testing for the BRCA
They
genes and
really?
others. Yeah,
Okay, I am so my whole launch event was all about that. I have so many episodes
it's
about it,
so
so that's
important.
amazing. They went through, and what was their results, if you care to
My
share?
my recollection, because my one sister just did it recently. My recollection is that they don't have it,
Okay,
um,
that's good.
which is good. But I think, I mean, so from that standpoint, like, yeah, and
Mhm,
my mom's brother had died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I believe, cancer,
mhm.
when he was like in his early 20s. And, even just from a standpoint of like the way science works, of being, wow, this is something we get to be mindful of. My mom was also an alcoholic, and that's been a big thing in our family and people dealing with that. So just being honest about like, yeah, these are things that we get to pay extra attention to
Mhm.
in our family. I mean, depression and suicide and other elements too, of like, yeah, that's genetics. There's a part of these that are genetic. And so we get to be extra mindful of that. And one of the things that I think that's been really healthy, we're pretty radically transparent and honest. Again, partly mm, as a healthy counteraction to so much secrecy growing up and like
Mm.
not living that way, that, my dad and brother and sister, we are so transparent and honest about these things and talking about it. And we talk about, the times when my siblings maybe attempted suicide, or about breast cancer, or about the things that happened. And it's not always easy, but it has created so much connection, and we're able to navigate these things. I mean, there are practical matters around this, like having health insurance and a will. And like, you know, when my mom was dying, she didn't have any of that in place. And thank God my dad's a lawyer. My godmother's one of the top end of life attorneys in the country, who
No
has an
way.
amazing blog, by the way, onthewaytodying.com.
I think you've sent this
Onthewaytodying.com.
to me,
I
but we
probably
should
have.
we
So my
should
godmother,
totally
Paula,
plug this. Yes.
it's amazing. And she's dealt with, like, the FBI will call her in as like an expert witness in
What?
like crazy, 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 crazy cases. And so, navigating all of that, thankfully I had immediate resources to people who could help last minute get, a trust and all these other pieces set up, mostly so that my sister Nikki could raise my sister Felina. Like that was the main thing we were trying to do, much less deal with like all this debt and, messy financial situation my mom left. But like these are really practical things, and they're things that we should all be talking about. Like, spoiler alert, we're all going to die.
Wait,
I know.
didn't know.
30 episodes
I'm freaking
in,
out.
people had no idea.
I'm freaking out.
But I think there's something really beautiful about having those conversations. And to me, I do think it takes courage, but we're not helping anybody by ignoring it. And I think often, particularly when somebody's in the process of dying, it's like, well, we can't, if we admit that that's what's happening or might happen, we're like, I don't know, giving bad juju or something. And I don't think that's the case. I think
No.
it is such a gift to give to whomever we leave behind, to like leave things in order.
Yes.
It's such a gift. Paula, who wrote the blog, she says, people generally die the way they lived. Put another way, how we do one thing is how we do everything. And if you're like a crotchety dick while you're living, generally that's your experience in death. If you're a loving, compassionate person, generally that's my experience of how that person then dies, sort of regardless of the situation. And I just think it's a huge gift. God willing, we all live to our old age and die of natural causes and all of that. But I mean, look at Kobe, right? It's what's in the news. Like tragedy happened, car accidents happen, these things happen, and it's not guaranteed. We're sort of these mammal flesh suits walking around in a pretty dangerous environment, frankly. And like bad things happen and it's tragic. And I hope for myself and for others that it doesn't. But if it does, what a gift if we can practice like just the practical things of like, well, have health insurance. If you have dependents or loved ones or others, life insurance is probably a good idea. Having a will is a good idea. And how do you want to die? How do you, do you want to be on life support? Do you want people to keep you alive? Are you willing to donate your body to science? All these things, like you actually have a lot of control over it. And I think that's part of it too. Yes, it's for the people who will be left. And it's also for you. Like being able to take ownership over that process, I think is something that can be really, really powerful and really beautiful.
I completely agree. I think it's so important. One of my episodes is this really cool organization called Lantern, and it's like all these young people our age who have lost a parent, and they like teach you how to write a will when you're in your 20s and 30s. And I'm going to document my experience writing my will. I'm completely healthy, but I'm like, you don't have to do it now, or you could, So I'm with
Why
you.
not?
I also, my dad literally, he had ALS for 15 years, and for so many of those years was paralyzed, and in the last at the end for several years couldn't speak. And I can't say from experience the best time to figure this out is when you can no longer speak. So have some experience, have some thoughts on it all.
Yeah.
But it is funny. It's not taught. It's not talked about. So it's not anyone's fault our age that hasn't done this. Why would they have? But
yeah, and especially in American culture, I think we think of death as like, well, let's just not talk about it. Let's just pretend it's not going to happen. It's like, that's the only thing we know is going to happen. Like,
right.
That is the only thing that is certain.
Right.
And so to practice, I mean, like, that's why I love what you're up to. And with this, that we can practice having that conversation, right? And ask your friend, hey, do you have a will?
Right.
Ask your parents, right? Parents are often not great at talking about it, but maybe we can find a way, hey, I'm just curious, like, what are even sometimes it's easier to start with like, what are your beliefs about death? What do you think happens, right? There's a really cool book called Sum, S-U-M, that is like 41 vignettes about like totally different ideas of maybe what happens after we pass away. It's really, really interesting.
Of course, I was going to ask you if you had an interesting book, podcast, or show that, Ben's just answering all the questions before they're asked, which is great. I'm just sitting here being, yeah, this is amazing. So Sum, you would recommend?
S-U-M, great book. Check out my aunt's blog, onthewaytodying.com. I have another friend, Alua Arthur, who's a death doula. She's got a great website and her Instagram, Going with Grace, and she talks about these things a lot and navigating, again, death and dying and all of that. So those are some immediate resources I would tell people to take a look at.
Fantastic. And was there a book or film that helped you get through your own grieving process, perhaps several years ago? either related to death or just something that you found inspiring in some way?
I I think there are a lot of family movies that were really meaningful to our family, and I think watching those has been really powerful, including movies that were, really meaningful during the divorce or during times of death and otherwise. My family also deals with things through humor a lot. Like
Love them.
as my mom, like my mom, just after she passed, like her mouth was open, and my little sister was like, what did she say? She said something like, "Well, her mouth is still open for a piece of pie," or like something. And we're like, so sad. We just watched our mom die, like super sad. And like, we're navigating, like, that's what happened. And it was that was an honest moment in the same way of like, maybe the most heartbreaking moment I've had was when when my mom was dying in her sort of last night. Um, I remember my little sister saying like, "Hey, is mom gonna die?" And I got to say, "Yeah, she is." Like to practice that honesty, but that like both were available. There was just tremendous heartbreak and sadness, and there was comedy. Yeah, we infused some lovely comedy into her funeral when the pastor was my mom was quite religious by the end, and he was interviewing us kids about her, and we're like, "Yeah, well, she was born a poor black child," and he shared that at the funeral, and like other pieces like that were for us and our family and the way that we navigate it. I'm not saying everybody has to, but like that's
Mhm.
okay, and that you have permission to navigate it in whatever way that is. So to answer your original question, like watching those family movies was really powerful for me. There's a lot of comedy stuff that's been really powerful as a coping mechanism with my family. Currently, This Is Us. I don't get through a single episode without crying, and it brings back so much nostalgia and dealing with like family and like all and death and all those pieces. So for me, that is totally my catharsis right now.
I love This Is Us too.
It's all
I've
good.
talked to a couple people that don't care for it at all, and it's fascinating when you're so into something that someone is so not into, and you're like, how are we both on this planet? But
My
that's
experience
humanity.
is that if you've had any kind of what I would call traumatic childhood, I
Mm,
think it resonates. The
mm.
people who I find don't, not always, I'm not gonna make a
They're
blanket
like, my
statement like
life was
that, but
great.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you didn't have like pretty intense family challenges growing up, I think it doesn't resonate as much. It's like, oh, it's not, that wasn't my experience.
So interesting. Well, yeah, I love what you share on social media. I mean, it's been a catalyst for me to be more open about myself. I mean, I would say, well, our social media, not that it's similar, seeing as I mean, you don't dress up in a beard. I mean, you have a beard. You're
It's
not
not dress up,
right.
but I
Okay.
do have a beard
Yes.
often.
Hashtag Jonathan Vaness for life. But like, I think we both try to share pieces of our personal journey as well as the personal aspects of our professional journeys. I think we both see them as interconnected. I really appreciate what you have to say on there, and I like what you said about how death is the only thing that is certain. I don't think we think about our mortality at all. Even in this conversation right now, I know I'm sitting here thinking I need to get a blood test because you're supposed to get one every few years or even every year, which most people don't know about. And I was supposed to get one last week and I left. I was like, I feel faint. And I just didn't get one. And it's like, just get the blood test. Just make sure your blood is fine. Just do it. And I'm sitting here and I'm like interviewing people about mortality. And even myself, I'm like, oh, do I need to do that right now? This has nothing to do with the interview, but do you get blood tests once a year or once every few years or ever or never?
Yes.
Curious. Okay.
I'm a big believer in science, particularly for things like that. I do my best to not take medicine I don't need. I eat super healthy. I, do my best to not use medicine but we have cured cancer. Uh, for women, for example, the HPV vaccine, we've literally cured cancer. Like that's a big effing deal. We can prevent bad things from happening. We can be aware that you're at risk for breast cancer. We have all these different things, but often again it's like that that paradox of, well, what I'm afraid of is this, so I'm not going to do it. And then that's what creates it, right? My mom, I'm sure on some level was afraid of dying. And so she didn't go to the doctor because she was afraid, right, that they would tell her that she was dying. And that's what caused her to die. Had she gone to the doctor and kept getting treatment, she might have had a much longer, healthier life. She certainly would have felt better. She was miserable for, she was so sick for so long. But so it's that reminder, okay, the thing that I'm afraid of, if I'm afraid of it or I'm bumping up against fear or resistance, that's a pretty good indication that that's probably something important. That's probably a conversation that's important for me. That's probably somebody that I get to reach out to that's important.
I just don't want them to stick the damn needle in there. I want to know what they say. I want to know what the results are. I don't want to go through the process.
You want to have gotten your blood drawn.
But you get your blood drawn sometimes? Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
do you do it every year?
I do it once a quarter.
What? 4 times a year?
Yeah. I was on...
No way.
Way.
Are you? I didn't even know that was an option. Okay. This is great to know. See? Learning things every day.
Yeah. And I was also like, if only for regular like STD, STI testing.
Great.
Just on a regular basis, just to make sure everything's on the up and up.
That's fantastic. Is that can they not test that in urine? Is it specifically
it's
blood?
Both.
Okay.
So some things they find in your urine.
Mm-hmm.
Some things they find by doing like throat swabs. Some things they find by doing anal swabs. And some things they find in your blood. So like herpes, right? There's herpes simplex 1 and 2. Like almost everybody has simplex 1. It's what we often call cold sores, right? Like most people have it.
Mm-hmm.
That you find in the blood.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, 'cause since I've been with the same partner for so long, that's a different story. Although I still, when I go to the gyno, they still look me in the eye and they say, we need to do this. And it's like comical because you're like, literally no, but I just do it because you just do things.
Well, and it doesn't harm anything, right? Like additional information can only help. And like, I mean, crazy things happen or, it may not be from a sexual thing or.
Totally.
I don't know. Or people, often people have things that don't show symptoms that they're not aware of or that like there's lots of different things. HPV is a great example, right? There's lots of different strains. And first of all, men basically never show symptoms, almost never. Very, very few men.
But now I think they do.
It.
Now it's like a new thing where it's...
Sometimes you can, depending on the strain. But so often men don't know they have it because they're not showing symptoms and there's not really a good test for men.
Right.
And women can have it and your body can basically fight off most things generally on its own. But you might have gotten it 5 years ago, and then all of a sudden it's showing up. Certain things don't, like it would have been a recent partner, if it's like, I think, gonorrhea would be an example of that. But like, there might be things in our body that we just don't know. And to me, I'm like, I would rather have the information.
Absolutely. Speaking of gonorrhea, like they literally always check me for gonorrhea, and I'm always like, I still don't have it. I'm still the same
Which
person.
Which is good. Then
and
you
they're
can
like,
celebrate.
well, you don't know, but it's just like it's funny because I'm like, okay, sure, like check it. Sure.
But people often, I mean, I don't think that's probably the case with your relationship, but
other people,
statistically,
right,
it happens, and people go, nope, there's no way, and then it's like, actually, there is a way.
Is that not the worst way that you could find out about so many things?
Totally. There's also new things like there's a new. Basically STI that they're finding called mycoplasma that most people haven't been testing for. That's just a bacteria that again, you can just take antibiotics basically and it goes away. But like most people haven't been testing for it. So you might have gotten it 10 years ago, didn't know you have it, haven't been tested for it, didn't know it was there. So the point is go to the doctor, get your blood drawn, do the things, find out you're probably fine. And if you're not, most things like then we can at least do something about it. Even something as tragic as cancer. My friend, I've actually been on her podcast and she's talked about her journey with breast cancer at a young age and other pieces. Like you find that out by going to the doctor and it literally could save your life.
Did she find it early?
Relatively, yeah.
Okay. Because do you know, I mean, now I'm so interested about her. I'm like, I should talk to her. I'm very interested in young people with breast cancer. How is she doing now? And then I'll let you go. Okay. Now anyone who's still listening is like, I don't care about this girl. No, you should care about this girl. Okay. But you know what I mean?
I'm interviewing her on her podcast on Wednesday.
Great.
But overall doing well, but it's tough, right? I mean, the grief is a part of all of that too, right? And of mourning the life that maybe I could have had or that I would have had or that like grieving process of, oh my God, my life is so different and it will never be the same, right? And there's grief that comes in that. I also, my godmother Paula was talking about a friend who basically had, I think, stage 4 something cancer, was going to die. All the doctors were like, you're dying, like make arrangements. It's probably 6 months. Ended up in remission and is now alive and well and going, now what? I planned my whole life to be dead in 6 months.
Whoa.
And now I have this whole new life, but like I like sold some of my stuff and like changed what I was doing with my job and other pieces because I was planning to die. And now I'm not. Now I need to plan a life. And I know I'm still going to die someday. Like, and how do I navigate that? And that is so challenging.
Wow. It's very fascinating to be a human being on this earth.
Isn't it?
That is my takeaway.
Isn't it
that
such a gift?
And get my fucking blood drawn. Okay. If Ben Whitehair
Go
does
to
it
the
4 times
doctor.
a year, I didn't even know. That makes me feel so much better and worse. But no, not worse. But I'm like, okay, I should just really do this. And again, not because I'm scared of results, but I'm just like, the needle is scary. I think I might need to get drunk. Like, I'm actually so terrified.
They don't generally recommend that because it thins your blood and you might pass out.
Oh, shit. Can I do anything?
Probably.
Okay.
Be
now this is
safe.
getting weird. Okay, great.
For me, my trick is like I get in my brain and I think about what it will be like in 10 minutes or in an hour. Or I'll be like, I'll
so
put
many
myself in a thing. I'm like,
it's so many tubes.
I don't generally look at it. I've gotten better now because I remind myself, I'm like, tomorrow I won't be feeling this pain. So I'm going to pretend it's tomorrow in my brain. Way better than actually dying.
You got to right. It's like they check your hormones, they check like your organ function. There's all the kind of things.
Thanks to Obamacare, your annual physical is covered 100%.
Right. I mean,
thanks, Obama.
Thanks, Bam. Why did I call him Bam?
You call him Barry.
It's the time of the night where things start to get weird. Okay, well, we didn't talk at all about your professional journey as an entrepreneur or actor, which will have to be a part 2 at some point.
Would love to
learn more about that part of you.
I will just say, like, all of the work that I've done, everything we've talked about around practicing vulnerability, navigating grief, navigating my own traumas, practicing healthy boundaries, all of those skills are all things that have dramatically, meaningfully, even in dollars, transformed my business life. Like, all of those practices are the main things I would attribute to the growth that I've had in my business.
Fantastic. So part 2 to come at some point. But for now, please let us know where people can find you. Also, if they would like to coach with you or work with you. I know we didn't go too much into that, but if you want to leave all your info.
You can find me. I'm pretty easy to stalk on all social media. I'm at Ben Whitehair, like it sounds. At Ben Whitehair on all social media. BenWhitehair.com has links to most of my stuff. If you're an actor, I have a website called Working.Actor, which is everything you need to be a working actor for crazy inexpensive. I want there to be more artists, so I want to make it accessible. But so if you're an actor, check out Working.Actor. And if you want to grow your social media, I have a social media company, TSMA Consulting.com, the social media advantage, TSMAconsulting.com. And if you are part of a business, especially like a medium or larger business that's growing and scaling, then I have a consulting company, so you can reach out to me as well about helping companies grow and scale and implementing kind of all the things that we're talking about, company culture and otherwise, in a way to make sure that your company actually grows and scales successfully.
If you're feeling successful and up to it, call Ben. If you're feeling bad about yourself at this point moving forward and comparing yourself, call me. Let's talk about how we're not Ben Whitehair and let's find ways how we can become more close to Ben Whitehair. Is it really sad that I'm so excited for you to be an old man? Because you're
back in my day.
But your headshot, not in like a weird way, but like your headshots are gonna say Ben Whitehair, and knowing you're gonna have like a funny thing, and you're gonna talk about it every time.
Yes. Well,
do you ever think about that?
Well, I'm starting to go. People's like, oh, you're starting to get gray hairs. I go, they're white hairs.
That's perfect. But imagine when you're like 87, you have completely white hair, and every audition you go to, how cute are you gonna be?
It's gonna be pretty great. I'm
Ben Whitehair is going to be your headshot. You're going to have white hair.
May I be lucky enough to be around at that age?
It's going to be your prime, your 2 booking prime. No, that's too far away. But we don't know.
You never know.
We don't know anything or what will happen to anyone.
except that you're going to die. So go to the doctor. Tell the people in your life you love them. Choose love.
All right. Choose love. Bye. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much.
Adorable.
Bye for now.
Bye for now. Yay. Bloopers. Great. I can't wait. I'll probably cut all of this part out, but it's fun to just like have a moment. You know what I mean? Also, something I forgot to say that I'll cut out too is, and I'm speaking for myself as much as you, speaking a little bit slower than you normally would.
I speak very fast.
Which is hard for the us folk of it all. So that's something.
Well, people can speed it up. I listen to podcasts at 2x speed and it works really great.
Cool. Oh, do you really?
Yeah. I listen to books at 3x speed because I'm a weirdo.
They say that really intelligent people do that.
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but I do listen to it fast.
That just put us both into a category immediately. I was like, I don't do that, and he does. Great.